Show. My name is Jack McLean. I am your host, and tonight my guest is Shaun Baker. He's the founder of PEAQ Performance Centre, based in Adelaide, a strength and conditioning coach with well over a decade of experience. He's completed his master's. He's the founder of PEAQ Performance Centre. Sorry, guys.
You got some feedback there.
Got some feedback there. The YouTube channel just popped up. A strength and conditioning coach who has over a decade in the industry, holding a master's degree and Australian Strength and Conditioning Association Level 2, worked with elite and semi-elite grassroots athletes, and specifically has worked with Australian rules football as his primary sport. Before we start tonight's episode, our mission here at Prepare Like a Pro is to empower aspiring athletes and staff with practical knowledge from some of the industry's most inspiring individuals and to strengthen the AFL community. If you like the show, please show support by following us on Instagram and subscribing to the podcast. We're on iTunes, Spotify, and YouTube. Welcome, Shaun. Thanks for jumping on, mate. Second time.
Jacko, mate, thanks for having me. I'm pumped and ready to go. And one-on-one, mate, I'm feeling pretty special. We're ready.
I know, the 10-minute bite size just didn't do you set to get you back on.
But no, it was, I really enjoyed it, mate, and a credit to you for putting that all together. And, great to hear from, like-minded coaches around Australia, and particularly a couple of guys there that I hadn't really heard of before, potentially, or had a bit of an inkling of, but didn't really have a true sort of, in-depth understanding about what they're about. So to get to know those guys a bit more has been fantastic. So, you've helped to develop those connections, mate, and we appreciate what you're doing.
Yeah, it was. I found the same way. Thanks, mate. I thoroughly enjoyed it being an S&C nuffy, but it was interesting. Like you have your Woodfords and Lockie Wilmots, the guys in our sort of generation that have grown within this social media stream, and then you've got Tim Schleiger, Darren McInnes, Chris Bergen, who before social media setting where doing big things, great things, but it was before that time. So it was interesting to share similarities across the different experiences amongst the group and what works and some learnings as well for the group. So for those that are listening to the podcast world, if you missed that, we are releasing the episodes on the bite size every Friday, but also you can watch the full presentation, which I would recommend on YouTube. Take us back to the beginning of your career, Shaun. At what age did you discover you had a passion for strength and conditioning and also working with athletes?
Yeah, admittedly, to be honest with you, I fell into it, mate. So, I was always passionate about playing footy. And, I'm sure there's probably a lot of scenarios out there where there's strength and conditioning coaches that maybe had a crack themselves and didn't quite make it. I like to call myself a bit of a preseason specialist. So, I would love the running and, the strength work that was conducted, throughout the preseason and that would be my time to shine. But when it came to time to find that magical red pill on the weekend, maybe I wasn't quite as successful as some of the other guys, in my team. So I went to uni to sort of study. I applied for the double degree in human movement and teaching, sort of thinking I was going to be a PE teacher. Again, probably another flooded market. I only got the TR for exercise science itself. And when I got into the second year of our degree, opportunities came out to get involved or at least apply for one of a number of internships. So there was, Port Adelaide Crows, I think Adelaide United. So I just chucked my hand in the ring and was fortunate enough to sort of, nab one of the spots at the Crows. So 2011, 2012, I did an internship under Nick Daicos, particularly in the Strength Power program. Nick that year, I think it was that year, he might be won like ASCA Coach of the Year. So super, super smart guy. It was his first year in AFL. He's got a background pretty heavily in rugby. I think rugby sevens in particular he'd been involved in. And one of the most valuable experiences of my career, I think. I was pretty fortunate to have that reality show pretty quickly. It's not all sort of glamorous and, it's not just simply spending time in the gym with the boys all day. There's a lot more to it. And, he let me know about that pretty quickly. And he gave me a great scope and helped me to shape who I am today. Once that was finished up, we had the opportunity to either stay there and do an honours or move on and do a master's degree and potentially sort of maybe get a few other experiences. I felt like at the time honours was just going to be probably another maybe year or so of some free research. So I decided to go the masters by content through County University. and at the same time, just sent my resume around to every SANFL club available. Only one out of the 10 got back to me, Woodworth Science Footy Club. So, I went out there and assisted their program for a little while. And that sort of, in a sense, was where PEAQ, was born. So when I did go out there, and I'm sure it's probably the same in the VFL, for example, I don't really know the logistics, but in SANFL S&C, there's little to no money really involved. And particularly at the time that I sort of got involved, I was a little bit late to the party. There was nothing to financially offer. They said, we'd love to have you around. But, as a bit of a trade-off, did you want to do some, private work out of our gym here? Feel free to bring people through and you can use it for free. So that was sort of the agreement that we came to. So I would do that on the side, throughout the day and early mornings, and then in the arvos it will be dedicated to helping the SANFL squad. At the end of 2014, an opportunity came along to take over, the West Adelaide Footy Club program, which is, a rival to Woodworth Torrens. So I took over their senior program, and we were fortunate enough to win the first league premiership in 32 years. So that was sort of pretty special. And
the difference, mate.
Nah, look, as you would know, there are many pieces that need to come together to elicit performance. I think I was fairly lucky that we had a few ex-AFL guys coming back towards the end of their career. So guys like Jason Paul-Pleasure, who'd just been delisted from the Crows, Ryan Willits, who had some experience at the Power, Chris Schmidt, who'd been on an AFL list. They were all sort of getting towards the end of their careers and coming back. Just everything sort of seemed to come together, at that one instance, and with some great success. And don't get me wrong, that year we had some great juniors coming up. I think that same year we had 7 athletes get drafted. So we're talking about Will Snelling, Riley Bonner, Aaron Francis, Tom Keogh, John O'Beach. So we sort of got decimated a little bit and went from winning the flag one year to struggling the next. So I was fortunate enough to sort of see both ends of the spectrum. From there, a couple of opportunities came up just through word of mouth. Did some work with the Darling Cricket Academy, so I got to travel overseas a few times to India to work with some of their state level athletes over there. Sort of circled back around to the Port Adelaide Footy Club, where we worked with father, son, and next generation academy athletes. And same again, starting to see some great talent come out of that. So when we're working with the 14-year-old, Jackson Meads and Tex Wanganines that are coming through now, Marty Fredericks, those sorts of guys, and Trent Burgoynes. So it was cool, a nice little experience to give them their first little introduction to long-term athletic development. And at the end of 2018, along this journey, we're talking about some really cool things that happened. All of it was still part-time, and all of it was still, very lowly paid. So all of it was still subsidised by me doing private stuff on the side. For the most part, I was doing it out of the facilities that I worked for. When I ended up going to the Power, obviously you sort of can't, bring, general public sort of through their facility. So I was just contracting out of a gym down the road. We sort of got to a bit of a fork in the road at the end of 2018. I was almost feeling like, I've done this for a while now. I feel like there's limited opportunities for me to grow and progress. Maybe we decided to take this, this private side of things a bit more seriously. So we decided to jump in the deep end, and that's sort of where PEAQ really was born. So I was fortunate enough to have developed a bit of a following in that private sector for a few years prior to opening the facility. So it wasn't just out of nowhere. And then that in turn has led to connections with Crows AFLW and now Australian lacrosse as well. So yeah, it's been a really cool journey, mate. Had a lot of luck along the way. Feel very fortunate to be surrounded by lots of good people, and I guess it's just a matter. And I think like you do, just continue to put yourself out there, continue to network as many coaches as possible, and always try to put your best foot forward, because good reputations travel fast and bad ones travel faster. So you've always got to make sure you don't get complacent. Sorry if I rambled on a little bit there.
No, it's good. I love that story, like you said at the start. Typical S&C, someone who loves sport, loves the training side even more. Early days wanted to be a PE teacher. I think you ticked every box of standard S&C, mate. That's awesome.
Absolutely. Is it like talking to the same person or what?
Yeah. You found your tribe, that's for sure. when take us back to that stage where you're doing the internship, Nick Paulos, and you're sort of carving your way for those S&Cs that are at that stage of their career. You mentioned that he gave you some open and honest sort of expectations about the industry. How important is it to see an environment like that early on in your career, do you think?
I'm super grateful for it. And I guess I have that hindsight now, particularly because I do see a lot of, new graduate students coming through that maybe have a little bit of a warped sense of what the industry truly is, whether they think it is, going to be all roses or potentially that they believe they're going to walk out of their degree straight into a full-time role. Having that experience prior to graduating, I think was invaluable. And I'd be a very different person today, I think, if I didn't have him there to sort of give me a reality check. I was talking actually on another, local podcast today, actually. And, they said to me, what was going through your head, the first day that you crack into this internship and you start to see guys that you've been watching on TV for ages and, potentially some reasonably big names. And I think for myself, one of the biggest realizations early was just probably being a little more professional and understanding that coach to athlete relationship. So I find, and, I think naturally for myself, a bit of a coping mechanism really is that, when I come into an environment and potentially where I maybe am not as confident or I'm trying to establish myself or maybe just don't know guys' names, I'll go in there and go, what's going on, legend? How are you, big fella? What's happening, mate? These are sort of, terms and the language I would use. And, in a lot of senses that's fine. But Nick sort of pulled me in pretty quickly in the first week and said, guys like Dean Bailey, he's not your mate. He's not a legend. He's not a big fella. Mate, you call him Dean and you refer to him by that name, You are nobody, to an extent. It was. I did copy a couple of little whacks about professionalism, and at the time I thought, Jesus, this is a bit rough, but very grateful for that. In the long term, I look back now and think, mate, I was just a spud student who was a bit excited. They've probably seen it a million times before with every intern that comes through, but yeah, certainly. Very glad that I had that experience for sure. Even though at the time I was thinking, I'm a bit hard done by.
Yeah, just trying to build a vibe here.
Absolutely, exactly.
Oh no, I love it, mate. That's thanks for being open and honest and sharing that. I think it is invaluable for S&Cs to have that moment where you sort of recognize, okay, how am I going to fit in this environment? Like you mentioned, everyone's a bit different in how they carry themselves in new environments. So being aware of that, and you only can build that awareness by getting feedback, which is good that you had a mentor, Nick, to give you that feedback to build that awareness. For like how you said at the time, you didn't feel like it was helping you, but in hindsight, now that you're a mentor to other coaches, you can tell what he was doing. For young coaches that are going through maybe a mentor that is being tough on them, or it might be someone else in their industry, but they are, they don't care for them and it's with their best interest. What is the best way to sort of try and handle that feedback? Are you a note taker? Do you absorb it? Have some ways that if you sort of use them, make the most of mentors.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I think, certainly take that feedback on board, no matter how harsh you do think that it might be at the time. And I think that's a good idea. Look, I didn't do that, but I can see the value in, for example, taking notes and sitting down and reflecting on it. I think it's good to get your thoughts out on paper and have it sitting there in front of your face. And I think probably just one of the big things would be try to critically evaluate the reason why you think maybe they're giving you that feedback. Is this or is this with my best intentions in mind? And most circumstances it is. I don't think there's many people out there, at this stage that would be doing it just to, for tall poppy syndrome, to try to knock people down. I'm sure, there's some sort of outcome that they're trying to elicit out of providing that feedback. And, potentially if you think that it is too harsh, or you don't think that you deserve that, potentially, talk to other people about that in another critical sense and be able to see, what their ideas are, maybe some mixed experiences within the industry as well. Reach out to your networks and say, this is the scenario that was in, this is the feedback that I got. Do you think this is correct as well? But I think in most circumstances, there hasn't been too many times that I can reflect on now and think, this bloke was giving me feedback just to be a prick. There was always some underlying message behind it. And the more and more that we get entrenched in the industry, the more and more that you sort of find yourself potentially in some sort of way providing that same sort of feedback to those coming through as well. I've certainly had many times where I've talked to guys and just had to think more, just give them a bit of a reality check as to where they sit in the industry. And like trying to do that in a really constructive manner. I certainly don't try to berate those coming through, but we have instances, and I would have been the same, where there's guys that maybe still studying, for example, that maybe have had some experience and some success in the private industry, for example, which is certainly very different to the pro sector, where you're observed under a microscope a lot more closely, and they potentially get a bit of a warped sense of where they may sit and how good their ability is. That they all of a sudden think that they can't do anything wrong, and that their programming is perfect, and they might have found one principle that they really abide by, and that's what they stick to. So just saying, look, here's a million other things that you would be judged by if you had a contract at a professional club. Just remember that you've had experience in this area, but maybe you're lacking experiences in all these other areas as well. And always refer back to that Dunning-Kruger effect. I'm sure you've probably used that graph a few times, where you've got the graph of knowledge versus time. And as soon as you get out of uni, your knowledge is right up here. But the more and more you do, you just realise that or actually, oh my God, I'm a fair way off the pace. And actually, the more you surround yourself with really knowledgeable coaches, the further off the pace you realise you are.
Yeah. I'll have to mention, because
I'm down here somewhere, I think.
Yeah, I'm with you, mate. It's a long journey. Brett Johns and Feenoggin are commenting on the chat. So Brett's, these are your mates. Any better than Sets and Bretts? That's when I think you're talking about footy.
So I need to give a big shout out to those guys. They're old Port Adelaide legends. So that, I guess, where I started my journey is transitioning from being a spud player to getting stuck in the industry was at the Port Magpies Football Club. So essentially, probably, I think, look, I can't remember when I was there, whether it had just happened or whether it was in the process of, the Magpies and the Power amalgamating. I'm not too sure how much of that you're over in Vic, but that sort of happened. But
I heard it's a super successful club.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think 36 premierships or 37 premierships, and they had a bit of a golden era, through the 80s and early 90s, particularly probably just before I sort of really followed it. But Adrian Setri, he is a bit of a club legend there, a multiple premiership player, and really heavily involved in boxing, and had a passion for this transitioning work. And one of his very good friends, Brett Johns, who's an Australian record holder powerlifter. They were doing a lot of work with the Pies in both those areas, and they sort of took me under their wings, early on in the piece, and I learned, a massive amount from there. And it's funny, they're completely honest in saying they don't have exercise science degrees and all those sorts of things, but essentially, they just have a great deal of experience under their belts, and a lot of the philosophies that they were pushing, essentially in some sort of context, are still applicable in today's S&C as well. So probably that they will be laughing about. And look, I can't see his comments, but probably the biggest thing that they ever taught me is when I was a young, I reckon 17 or 18-year-old, I think I rocked up to one gym session, and look, I'm so sorry to say this, but rocked up to a gym session with a set of gloves on, and they absolutely berated me. I got an absolute piss taken out of me. And I can promise you I never did that ever again in my entire life. And
footy shorts and ASICS shoes.
Absolutely. You know it. So that they will they'll take a lot of credit for that for sure. But no, great guys, absolutely.
Yeah, that's awesome. Valuable lessons, eh?
Absolutely.
And the other side of that I took from that I think is invaluable for what you're doing now, and you mentioned how you developed that, in hindsight, you were developing an audience, whether you knew it or not. And when you opened up that gym, it allowed you to really flourish. So throughout the time of getting your strength and conditioning experience across different sports, mainly AFL and cricket as well, but you were you're also developing your business skills and, you know, not working outside the industry, but actually honing your coaching by running a personal training business, whether it was with football clubs or renting a space at a gym. For those coaches that are working in sport and they're strength and conditioning coaches, but they haven't built that, or they haven't taken that plunge, I guess, of running their own business, and they're making ends meet in another industry, but they want to take that plunge. What would be your advice for renting a gym or running a PT business?
Yeah, look, I think the first thing is, and probably one that again is another common one that we come across, is I probably started the majority of the clientele that I was working with, admittedly, was, you know, some of the players' partners, to be honest with you, that, you know, just wanted to simply tone up. A couple of them had, you know, some little sort of sporting goals, triathlons and things like that as well. But really, I was at a stage in my life where to make ends meet, I just had to say yes to everybody and anybody. So I couldn't really be selective in you know, who I trained with, and met some amazing people, and actually, you know, found that received a lot of gratitude for working with all sorts of people, as opposed to, you know, just sort of exclusively saying athletes. And in saying that as well, tried to treat every opportunity, even though, you know, whether you're working with a general punter or somebody who wants to, you know, get better for Div 5, you know, church netball on weekend, try to use every hour that you have with those people as an opportunity to sharpen the tools up. So, you know, if I'm working with Jane, who's the mum of Johnny, who's a sample player, and, you know, he said, "Oh, look, my SSC coach is doing some PT sessions down there. Can you get down and support him? You know, how can you add some for, you know, movement assessment to Jane? Can you potentially, in your movement prep, you know, add in maybe like a little marching drill, or, you know, a little A skip just to get her moving, so you're starting to, you know, honing on the skills of looking at how people move. How can you start to still, you know, in our last podcast, we talked about developing the Big Ten, you know, how can we hit as many of those, you know, foundational movement patterns? Can we still get Jane, you know, the mum of 35-year-old mum, can we get her squatting properly, hinging properly, lunging properly, you know, pushing, pulling in vertical and horizontal directions, bracing and rotating really well? You know, if you can do that with somebody who maybe doesn't have a great deal of confidence in their movement, then it's going to be easy once you get to somebody who's a footballer. So if you are just starting out, don't be selective. You know, just grab onto anybody who's willing to pay you money to come and train, and just imagine that they're, you know, training for some sort of sport, or, you know, imagine that it's another opportunity to hone in those skills. And then from there, you know, the busier that you get, that usually comes from, you know, word of mouth from those people. It comes from you developing content from, you know, recording those people and saying, look, Jane couldn't squat 30 kilos when we first started, but look at her, she's squatting 45 now. Like, this could be you, you know, or, you know, all those sorts of things. So it just sort of ends up being a bit of a snowballing effect. People want to generally go to people that look busier as well. You know, it's just, you know, a funny mentality we have as human beings. And then it's when you fill up your schedule, then you can start to hone in and be a bit more selective, and then say, okay, look, if Jane wants to keep training, you know, maybe it's a more premium price, or potentially, you know, you take a little trainer underneath you, and you here's your opportunity now, Steve-O, to have a crack and work on your skills. I take a little percentage of that as well. So it's just, you know, take on as much as you can, and always use it as an opportunity to learn and grow. And that's how, you know, that word of mouth and that social media will grow as well. So I think that's, you know, there's no better promotion than you know, getting your hands dirty in the industry. And now, you know, fortunate enough to be reasonably selective with who we do work with, and, you know, everybody that doesn't quite fit into that category, you know, can jump in with one of the other amazing coaches that we do have as well.
Yeah, I love that, mate. That's really sound advice. Whether, you know, you're trying to be the best coach that you can be, like you said, coaching is coaching. Whether you're coaching an Olympic athlete or you're coaching a mum, they've all got different movement competencies, and you still should go through your screenings and be as professional as you can and go through your processes from movement, and don't disregard anyone. I think that's a great message. But then also the business progressions as well. By doing a good job, getting results, it's going to pay back later on for the future of your business. And it's probably something that you've touched on. I know I've felt that we don't really know where we're going with our career, but if you just keep doing a good job, things start to fall into place like they have with yourself. So thanks for sharing your attitude, mate. It's obviously good. Success leaves clues, and I think it's a good notion for S&Cs to get as much experience as you can, like you said, early, and it starts to build momentum.
And I'm not just saying this to sort of blow wind up your ass. People probably look at Jack. I know certainly. I've talked to a few people recently when we talked about, when we're coming onto your podcast, and they go, far out. Jack is really like sort of exploded onto the scene in the last few months. Far out. What's he doing? But it's you who have created that. It's the fruits of your hard work, and the fruits of putting yourself out there, and the fruits of you contacting people and getting involved, and making those strong connections as well. So I would never look at somebody like you and say, Jesus, he's lucky. You've created it yourself, mate, as well.
No, I appreciate it. Yeah, it's definitely like you said, if you put in the work and you're passionate about it, which I think everyone who ends up staying in this industry for a long time, they have to have passion, and they have to work hard. You mentioned, we'll go back to that notion as well, how your full-time work isn't that often in the industry. Did you deliberately move different sports, like you're now in lacrosse? So field-based sports, team-based sports, obviously you've stuck with those themes, but you've got some good experiences with different sports under your belt over the last decade. Has that been an intention of yours, or is that something that's sort of just come on organically?
Yeah, good question. I think it's something that actually has just sort of naturally occurred. I know there's certainly, when I did have, I've sat and been turned down from 1,000 interviews, I'm sure, and always had those instances where you get told that there's people with more experience or people with more diverse experience with you, or you just missed out. And one of the things that I did get pigeonholed with a bit earlier on in my career is that my experience wasn't vast enough, which I completely agree with. For the first part, internship with the Crows, and then Centre of Excellence and assistant work with Woodville, and then running the footy program at West Adelaide. It was just like 6 years of football, for example, and didn't really have much else to show. The cricket opportunity simply came through a call and a referral. So the guy that had the position prior to me had just moved to India to work in the IPL. He was also a physio. He was sort of like a bit of a combined physio S&C at the time, and they were looking to bring a bit more of a, they called it at the time, a football ideology to their cricketing program, just because, traditionally cricketers had got away a little bit with being quite skill-based athletes, with more and more forms of the game becoming available, and those forms being shorter and sharper and more explosive. The focus for S&C had really ramped up. So, that was just a fortunate word of mouth call. The lacrosse stuff was pretty cool. That was exciting. When we first opened PEAQ, we had the vision. Our motto is closing the gap between local and elite. Yep. We always just thought that would be taking those pro football methodologies and principles and applying them and adapting them to your weekend warriors. But what we started to find, that something that we didn't actually sort of anticipate, is that there were lots of elite athletes from lowly funded sports coming to sort of seek us out. So I know it sounds funny. So we had a chunk of Australian lacrosse athletes that had prior just been going to like a group training studio, sort of like an F45 sort of setup. But they wanted to train and be treated as they were elite athletes, even though they have to self-fund everything. Same with ultimate frisbee, and I know when I first heard about that, most people sort of snigger a little bit. Oh, ultimate frisbee, that's cool, but probably don't respect. These dudes take themselves seriously, and they're representing the country, and they're pretty athletic units, and they train really hard. We've got some women that play roller derby as well. So all these sort of unique sports that are lowly funded, but people at the top of their game. Even for example, this might not make as much sense to you, but in South Australia, like rugby, both league and union is really small. It's barely heard of. So some of the top South Australian rugby athletes were coming to us to say that they wanted to maybe potentially make the move to the eastern states. So we started to mingle with all these people that were high end, but were self-funded because there's just no money in their sport. I was talking to a few of the lacrosse girls, and essentially what had been happening with the Australian program up until probably late 2019 was they had just hit up a coach from an American college obviously lacrosse is massive in the US. There's sort of daylight between them and most other countries. And they were just given a big PDF file, with all their running and strength and conditioning drills on there. But there was a lot of issues with that. First being, and it sounds like a very simple, easy issue to transfer over, but athletes probably don't really want to spend that time, and maybe don't always have the capacity to sit down and go through it. But all of the programming was written in yards and pounds, and these athletes are like, well, I don't know what that means. I'm just not even going to give it a crack. And the foundations of the exercise selection was really good, but some pretty complex stuff in there. So there was some cleans and some hang snatches, and the girls are saying, like, we've never done this before, I just don't know how to do it. So as opposed to giving it a crack, they just weren't doing it at all. So completion rates were very low.
Yep.
The other thing that we were seeing is that we've got contingents of athletes in WA, South Australia, Victoria, and then also over in the States as well. And by lumping them with that PDF program of conditioning, for example, depending on which stage of the season and what their club commitments were like, you had athletes with loads that were all over the place. So in WA, they might be in season, so they got two trainings and a game, and then they were doing the PDF conditioning on top of whatever they were doing. In South Australia, they might have been one training session per week, and then they were doing the PDF stuff and then playing. In Victoria, there might have been a lockdown, for example, so they're not doing anything except for that. So all of a sudden, you've got some girls massively overtraining, some that are bang on, and some that are massively undertraining, and nothing in between. So they were finding a lot of issues with that. That led to an introduction to the head coach, and we had a bit of a chat about ways that we would address those issues. One thing led to another, and we were fortunate enough to take over the women's program. And then probably after about 3 or 4 months, I think that the men's program, their ears perked up because they were doing something pretty similar, and I'd seen a pretty sizable shift in the ideology and the completion rates and just the language around the S&C stuff for the girls program. And they organised a Zoom meeting, and all of a sudden we took on both programs. So
awesome.
So it's been awesome. They've been a really gracious community to work with. Not having those opportunities before, they're pretty receptive to most things you say, which is awesome. And again, this is by sheer luck. Talking about that chance, is that when we first took them on board in early 2020, there wasn't much going on with lacrosse, and in the scope of 2 years, they've just been recognised by the IOC to be competing in the 2028 Olympic Games. So you've gone from like nothing to 1,000 pretty quickly. So I'll be heading over to Alabama in July with the crew to play in the World Games, which is the second biggest multi-sports event on earth, which is essentially sort of like either those sports that are just on the cusp or maybe are in contention of making the Olympics as well. So you go over there, it's going to be like Muay Thai, lacrosse, American football, all those sort of just on the edge games that aren't quite in the Olympics just yet. So really excited.
Yeah, that's awesome, mate. And another great gem for coaches listening, that there's nothing like good work to create future work. So that's, like you mentioned, you get that foot in the door, and then you do your work, and it starts to pay dividends by starting with the women. You're now working across with the men's as well. And I can imagine once you've got that momentum as well, the buy-ins just set from the men's from the get-go, because they've wanted you, they've seen you to be at that club. So that's super exciting, mate, and good timing both for yourself as well as Australian lacrosse. So bring on 28.
Yeah, absolutely. If they'll keep me around for that long anyway.
Yeah, that's true long-term athlete development right there. Looking back over your career, and then we'll get into the business side of opening PEAQ. But throughout this stage of strength and conditioning, is there a particular highlight of your career as an S&C that you look back on fondly?
Yeah, that's probably a hard question. I think it's hard to go past those any of the championships you've been involved with, no matter what level. I think, as we talked about before, probably the most special one from my point of view is the sample premiership with the West Adelaide Footy Club. Being the first opportunity for me to take over the reins and truly feel like I was, steering the ship, from at least that aspect of the program. And in a sense, it's been a launching pad for a number of other opportunities that have sort of followed on from then. It was because of that the Darren Lee Cricket Academy called, and then that's flowed into work at the Power and things like that too. So look, there's been many highlights, but I would say that's probably one to to pinpoint it, simply because I think it had such a great impact for sure.
Yeah, it's a massive achievement, and it would have been so rewarding to be a part of that after 32 years.
There were people just coming out of the woodworks you would never seen before. I think we always joke it's funny because and I love the club dearly and still follow them. And unfortunately, in years since I've been away from the club, and again, this is certainly nothing to do with me. There's a number of factors like we talked about in terms of athletes being drafted and staff members moving on and all those sorts of things that they've struggled a little bit. But we always joke when we look back at it, I don't think that they were ready for us to win the flag. I remember, we were the big underdogs going into the grand final. Even, it was a surprise that we'd even made it that far. All of a sudden you sort of fast forward to the end of the game and we've won it, and you sort of get instructed to go back to the club. And when we went back there for a big dinner and a big feast, and it was some of the worst food I've ever had in my life. It just didn't seem that they were prepared in any sense. Of the sloppiest schnitzels. I think there was a vegetarian there, and they just literally heated up a bag of frozen veggies and chucked on a plate. Nobody cared because everybody was singing beers anyway and celebrating. But yeah, no, it was some fond memories of some terrible food.
And what about on the flip side, mate? What's the biggest challenge you've faced, and what did you learn from it?
I think potentially, and I'll be completely open and honest. There's been two instances in my career that have probably been the most challenging. So number one, and these are both very similar instances. Number one was with that work at the Power, and I talked about us not seeing any or having the opportunity to grow and sort of opportunities drying up from a professional sense. We got to towards the end of 2018. I remember talking to the high performance manager in McLean at the time. We've still got a really great relationship with, but he just sat down and honest chat and said, we've loved the work you've done. It's been an awesome experience for those junior athletes coming through, and we really can't fault you. But unfortunately, the soft cap is tightening up, and we don't really have space for your role moving forward. We're probably going to condense it down and split your role between other professionals. It might be an option for you to start exploring other opportunities out there. So that was a bit gut wrenching, to be honest with you. It probably would have been easier to swallow if I'd done something terribly wrong. Yeah. And then fast forward again through the gym facility. We had a few of the Crows AFLW girls coming down and doing their off season with us. That led to a connection to the head coach, and getting a call up one day to say that one of their staff members had moved on to GWS. Would I be willing to jump in? So worked at the Crows AFLW for 18 months, which was an incredible experience, and they were wonderful people. We got to midway through the 2020 season, and COVID struck pretty badly. I know there was a time where we were sort of joking about it, and I remember we got on a plane I think we flew to Tassie, for example, to play against the Roos, and there was a family on there with masks. I'm like, come on, these guys are crazy. Like, what? Come on, it's not that bad. It's over in China. Like, seriously. And then fast forward to a fortnight later, and we're playing in front of no crowd against GWS. I'm like, okay, yeah. I was starting to get serious now. And then fast forward another week, and the club pulls everybody in and says, the season's done. We're finished. Oh, Jesus. So then sort of, do a heap of prep to sort of try to keep the girls working through and send them, external programs and catch up with them out at parks and that sort of stuff. But then to be sat down again and said, look, COVID's had a massive financial impact, on all of sport, including the club. We're getting rid of a portion of our female-only staff, and we're going to be passing it back over to the men's program. And you've lost another opportunity, unfortunately. Same again, for no touch wood, not as far as I'm aware, and it never was made aware of any wrongdoing. But unfortunately, just sort of the nature of the beast in two situations there, financial issues impacting clubs, cutting off the fringe guys like myself, who potentially were trying to get the foot in the door to work the way up. So certainly two challenges, but again, I'm a big believer in everything happening for a reason, and still super grateful for the experiences we had at those clubs. And certainly, no bad feelings from my end, and still am very close with, the people that I had those conversations with, like Macca's, like we said.
Yep. Thanks for sharing, mate. Really appreciate it. And it wouldn't be an S&C that's been in the industry for 10 years that wouldn't have that experience, I can only imagine. So I've certainly been in that situation, and it's definitely, like you said, if you did something wrong, it probably would be a little bit easier to swallow, because at least there's a learning there, where there's nothing more frustrating that where you put your heart and soul into something and it's out of your control. But I think it's a good message nonetheless to hear the things that work, and then also just the nature of the beast of the industry as well, particularly now with COVID. So that probably is a good segue to business and opening up a space. Take us through, when did the light bulb moment happen when PEAQ, when did you think of opening up a space? What was the situation?
Yeah, it all happened really quickly, and probably something that I haven't touched on too much was during that time when I talked about, when Mac has said explore some different options. I think jumped on sportspeople.com or the ASCA website and was just flicking my email out to every situation available. And there was a contact that we had sort of developed through some of that travel to India and so on and so forth. And I went through a few different processes and didn't get quite through. But one really went right to the end to sort of getting it happening. And again, with hindsight, it is a beautiful thing. There was an opportunity in Beijing, actually, to go work with some basketball over there. And a guy called Daniel Crumback, who had come across sort of throughout the journey, and he was part of the interviewing and recruiting process. And essentially, there was a big drive to get, I think, Western coaches over into the sort of those Eastern S&C programs. I think there had been a tendency to, because of their vast numbers of people, for example, in China, that S&C was probably underdone a little bit. They would just train. If anybody broke down, there was so many waiting in line that they would bring those in. But sort of around that time frame, there was a push to get some Western S&C coaches over to get involved. And I was fortunate to go through the process and get offered a position over there. This was right at the end of 2018, sort of all these things were happening. And, at the time I was like, this is my opportunity. Let's go. Let's make it happen. This could be pretty cool. But from a family perspective, it wasn't great timing. We were just about to get married in only sort of 2 or 3 months' time. And probably I just didn't have a solid enough, set of evidence to suggest that it'd be a great idea. I reached out to a lot of other S&C coaches that I'd met in my journey that had been over to China and heard really mixed reviews. Some of them really loved it. Some of them had some horror stories where, they clashed with the head coach and maybe potentially didn't get paid what they needed to be, or, that were fired for no reason. So I was like, it's a big risk to head over there. I was guessing that the work commitments would be pretty intense, and I'd be bringing my partner, Jamie, over to a non-English speaking environment by herself, no family. I'd be out. So I thought, is this really worth it? And that was when we decided to take that plunge and go, okay, let's open a private facility instead. There's sort of everything pointing towards it. And thank God that we made that decision now that we know what's happened over, in the course of the last 3 years. So essentially, it was just, okay, we're going to make this decision. Let's just jump on Real Commercial and see what's out there. We found this 400 square meter warehouse, just nice empty shell. I thought that was a nice sort of balance of giving ourselves some space and not, putting ourselves into too much debt that it was unachievable, and we didn't really have an understanding. We were just making it up from a business point of view, to be honest with you. We lent on my mother-in-law, who has a bit of managerial experience in recreation, but for the most part, it was just dive in and go for it. So reached out to equipment companies and probably had a limited time to get it done because we thought that timing was of the essence. We thought particularly in this, in this niche of an environment, if we didn't get open by January, we'd miss a big chunk of our market for pre-seasons, good weather, New Year's resolutions. So we pushed as hard as we could, worked all the way through Christmas and New Year's, didn't really sleep very much, and managed to get open with a pretty, now look back at it, on a pretty empty facility on January the 6th, 2019.
Yep.
And then, the rest is history. And I know this is probably a story I've told to a few people, but one of the first instances I really, really understood that I was a business owner and not just an S&C coach anymore was the first weekend we were open. I had back-to-back bookings. I was pumped up and ready to go, and thought, I'm living the dream now. This is it. I've done it. I've made it. we get through the first couple of sessions, everything's going well. And one of those sessions was a netball club. Ran him through, had the session perfectly sequenced out. I thought, this is brilliant. How good is this? We finished up. We're sitting down doing a bit of a cool down. The coach comes up to me and goes, "Where's Emily?" I was thinking in my head, who cares? This is brilliant. Like, I don't know where Emily is right now, but mate, I'm on cloud nine. Realised a couple of minutes later, Emily had gone to the bathroom and she was feeling a bit sick from some of the conditioning and she'd vomited but missed the toilet completely. She just spewed all over the floor. And it was at that point I realised I had no cleaning products. I was like, oh my God, like, what have I done? So, first weekend I've got clients backing up and I'm on hands and knees with paper towel and a fan, just trying to clean spew off the ground. I was like, wow, this is not how I envisaged it, but it gives you a bit of perspective anyway.
100%. Yeah, cleaning the gym. That's when you're paying rent, you don't have to worry about that. That's for sure.
Absolutely. No, definitely.
Oh, that's awesome, mate. And talk us through peak performance. What happens in the centre? What's a typical day for you? How hands-on are you now that it's been a couple of years, 3 years? Open. Talk us through for those that haven't been in the facility.
Yeah, so now really, really fortunate that we've had a pretty sort of explosive growth over the last 3 years, despite sort of everything that's gone on. I think that, it's probably the point of difference, our niche a bit, and also just that community engagement has been able to help us through. But essentially, PEAQ, we're a 24/7 performance facility, we like to sort of call ourselves. So our members get 24/7 access just via a key tag. All of the S&C equipment that you really need to sort of facilitate, those principles that we talk about, that we manipulate and adapt, from all of the elite experience that we've had and make them appropriate to everybody's sort of circumstances. The levels of sort of engagement or membership that we have, we've sort of got our basic performance model where, essentially you've got your program and you come in, you do it at your own time, at your own leisure, and go for it. And we do run a few, because there is demand for it as well, a few generalised classes, we call those, but still with the scope of a bit of periodisation in it. So we've got like a strength class, of which we run in 10-week blocks. So the first 3 weeks will be a bit more voluminous. The next 3 weeks will be a bit more what we call sort of like whether it's a strength accumulation or, a strength integration, where it might be a bit more pyramid-based training, where we're teaching them how to add a load appropriately, and then do a 3-week block of max strength. So that, might be, doing some 4x3s or, 5x5, those sorts of things. And then we work into a strength testing in week 10, where that could be 1 rep maxes, 3 RMs. We could do some force plate work. And then we sort of, repeat the cycle every 10 weeks. We've got conditioning classes, same sort of thing, endurance for the first 3. We've got a bit more sort of fartlek interval work the next 3. And then we've sort of got like a bit of a semi-basketball court area. We get out and do some, change direction on there as well. So try to integrate those, general classes into those for those who want it. But generally, most people come in and do their own, team builder programs. The next step up is we do have our Athletes Academy as well. So that's just another level of sort of individualization. So we've got set times where we've got 3 coaches out on the floor. You warm up in a small group setting. You've each got your own team builder program that you're working through, and you get coached in small groups. Similar to sort of what you would see in like an athlete's authority style setup. That's just sort of like one component. We've got our morning and arvo sessions from there. And then we do have the opportunity to come and do one-on-one coaching if people are really hungry to get that little extra level of care and love with them as well. So those are sort of the 3 options that we roll through. We're actually sort of in the midst of signing a lease for a bigger facility, which is exciting. We sort of looked at what does expansion look like for us. We're probably at a capacity at the moment. It gets really, really chaotic there in the Arvos, which is I love when that vibe is up and it's pumping, but we also don't want to make people feel too uncomfortable if it is overwhelming as well. Not everybody loves the place to be booming. So we sort of thought, what does that look like for us? Is that multiple locations? We think that probably just spreads you thin a little bit too much and you lose your quality control. We want to still always have that facility where I can come in and say good day to the members and interact with the community and sort of have a bit of an idea of what's going on with everybody. So At the moment, we're in 400 squares. We're in the process of negotiating 1,500. So it's going to be a big step up. But our goal and our vision is to sort of, almost be running that American private, facility. So it would be a full-size basketball court, potentially a bit of a fake turf area, just a more extensive, gym setup and those sorts of things too. So that's probably, let's be honest, like 12 months away, because it is going to be a brand new build, and things aren't being built quickly at the moment. I know another part of your question there was my involvement day to day. Certainly it's been less and less coaching now and more development. I still do pop out and coach here and there. I might do, a couple of sessions, every day or every couple of days. It used to be back to back, you try to squeeze in 8 to 10 hours of coaching per day, but now sort of bob in and out and make sure that we're developing those staff members. We've got 19 staff members on board now, which is exciting, and hopefully providing pathways for coaches that you and me didn't have when we were coming through the ranks as well. We do provide, at the moment, we started with the classic subcontracting agreement for, everybody that was on board, just because we didn't have the resources. We've now progressed that up to, casual employment for our staff, with the view to turn that into permanent and full-time, in the next 12 months as well. So just taking those baby steps up to being financially viable and making sure that we nurture those great coaches coming through as well.
That's fantastic, mate. I love hearing that. It sounds like a great space, great both for coaches to develop, but also for athletes, like you said, that don't have that access to elite coaching and programming and facility as well. They now do. So that's amazing, and no surprise why it's you've thrived in the last few years. One, because the demand, but also two, because all that hard work that you've done, and now people are coming out in groves to train with you and get involved. So that's awesome, mate. And in terms of the business side of things, who do you model off, and how do you go about learning those side of things? Like, obviously as a coach, we do our degrees, we learn off our mentors, and then suddenly now you're running a facility. Is that learning as you go? Is it listening to podcasts? Is it speaking to mentors that are doing, like you mentioned, Athletes Authority? Take us through, for business owners, what's the best way to learn that side, do you think?
Yeah, admittedly, it's probably a blend of all those things. Certainly at the start, it was just making it up, to be honest with you. As I said, I was fortunate enough. So my mother-in-law, she worked as a manager at a swimming recreational facility for 20 years. So there were certainly aspects of that we really lent on her to sort of assist us with. But for the most part, running a gym, we didn't really know anybody at the time that was doing it, to be honest. Just a great network of people in different professions. One of my sample athletes' dads was involved in IT, so I reached out to him, and he set up our back-end systems and our surveillance systems to allow us to be able to be 24/7 as well. So he's been incredible and still is involved in the business to this day. We had, we talked about Adrian Setri and Brett Johns before. Adrian Setri, as well as being a Port Adelaide superstar, he runs a painting business. So he organised painting the walls for us. Another guy, pretty much, if you are involved in a footy club, there's a good chance you'll know every single trade, or every single something. You'll find a connection somewhere to assist. But from then, as we started to become a little bit more established and found a bit more balance and had the opportunity to, definitely was listening to podcasts and some of those real strong sort of business leaders. Probably some of the cream on the top now. So admittedly, I probably hadn't modelled too much off of Athletes Authority until we went over recently and went to the Play Lab in Sydney a couple of months back now, and I really, really like their rehab model. I think I'm feeling really confident in what we provide from a performance point of view, but what they showed us and what they're doing in their integrative approach. Traditionally, and probably admittedly, what we had fallen into the trap of doing is that, if the physio will have an athlete come to them, physio will work with them to a certain extent, and then get to a point they just hand it over, and then we go for it from there. And there wasn't too much of that sort of integrated approach. So over the last 6 weeks, we've sort of elicited the help of a guy called Nick Richardson as well, who worked at a sports injury rehab clinic in Ireland, and sort of using both of those models to develop what we think will be best case scenario in South Australia. And even as recently as today, I've been catching up with external sources to talk about referral pathways too. And I think watch your space in the rehab model for South Australia. You'll see a very, I'm happy to say, very similar outlook as to what Athletes Authority have, but just adapted appropriately to suit our market a little bit more as well. So, at certain stages, definitely always try to be, whether it's being as an S&C coach or as a business person, always be a big funnel, take in everything, absorb as much as you can. And then, your end product at the end is what you feel like you need to filter out and what you think is appropriate at the time. Just because, there are many ways of doing it. There's no one way to go about it. If anybody tells you there's one way to go about business or one way to go about S&C programming, it's time to run away as quickly as possible.
Yeah, I love that. The funnel, it's a good way to approach it, because we're all on our own path, and you just take bits and pieces from different people along the way. And I think that was also a good thing to note is be honest with yourself, and whether it be business or coaching, about your chinks in your armor and working on those areas, whether you call them weaknesses or whatever, but noticing, okay, that's an area I need to work on, or whether it be finance, marketing, programming, rehab, whatever it is. So that's awesome, mate. We'll get into the lighter side of the podcast now, the get to know Shaun Baker.
Absolutely, here we go.
This will be a bit of fun. Which movie or TV series has impacted you the most, and why?
Oh, that's a tough one, mate. I'm a real documentary, like a Netflix documentary sort of operator, classic, like, Last Dance and all those sorts of things, I think are classics. But yeah, which has had the most impact? You're going to challenge me here, I reckon. Now, look, I'm not 100% sure on which has had an impact, to be honest with you. Probably a lot of stuff that I do watch is very drastically different to anything that I do in real life. So potentially, that's the switch off. You could say The Last Dance for inspiration and those sorts of things. So I watch it, and this is probably sounds a bit sinister, but murder docos and all that sort of stuff. I'm sure we're all probably good with watching them. So I would like to say that none of those have actually had any impact on my life, to be honest with you. So look, I'm going to let you down there, mate. I'm sorry, I don't really probably have one that I can nail down, but yeah, definitely a documentary, real life. Louis Theroux, love his work. Just real life stuff that makes me think, Jesus, I live a very sheltered life.
Yeah. It's Netflix has got heaps of them, isn't it? Like, you can just get down a rabbit hole of some people doing some crazy things. What about favorite inspirational quote and life motto?
Look, I like to. I've actually got this tattooed on my chest. I got a tattoo on my chest a long time ago. Pain is temporary, glory is forever. I think there's a lot of transfer to that, whether you take that in its literal term or metaphorical. There's been many circumstances that we've talked about, even in today's podcast, where there's been a short-term instance that's provided a bit of pain, but everything happens for a reason, or everything has its purpose. And I think if you stick to the process and don't give up on whatever it is you're chasing. If I'd given up in those two circumstances where I'd been told that that the soft caps are up and we can't fit you in anymore, then we wouldn't have a business, or wouldn't be pursuing these pretty exciting contracts that we've got coming up as well from a pro point of view. So yeah, I think that's the biggest one that we abide by for sure.
What about pet peeves in your work life? What makes you angry?
I think people that constantly go on about how busy they are. I think like, to an extent, mate, you are a business owner, you're an S&C coach, and you're a dad. I'd never hear Jack say, "Oh man, I'm so busy. I'm so tired. I'm so busy." You just get shit done. You're sitting here on a Friday night, podcasting and making it happen. You've probably got bubs tucked up in bed, and I do meet a lot of people, or hear a lot of people that I don't necessarily think are stupidly busy. And look, they might be, but it can be a bit of a mindset at the end of the day as well. We've all got the same amount of time. I know it's a bit of a cliche. Everybody says, like, Oprah has the same amount of time as you, but you just don't be so busy telling everybody how busy you are, mate. Like, it's not, and it's not a cool thing. Like, I don't think you're a wonderful person because you're super busy. Don't worry about that.
Yeah. No, I reckon that resonates with me, mate. I reckon I'm going to put that in the pet peeve toolbox. Just get on with it, and no one wants to hear that you're busy. That's good.
Perfect. I love it.
In a COVID-free world, which we're pretty much in now, or a new norm anyway, what's your favourite way to spend your day off?
Look, I feel like most of our days are, in some sort of context, like socialising, being out on the floor and coaching and, being very vibrant up and about. So actually, I really thoroughly enjoy on days off, just very quiet, either bumming around home or we're pretty close to the beach down here, which is nice. So just going and jumping in the water. I'm a terrible swimmer, but just splashing around to keep myself afloat somehow. I'm a little bit dense, but yeah, no, very, very low key. Spending time with my two girls, my wife and my little 2-year-old daughter, and yeah, just keeping it low key and not having a little time where I'm not like up and about.
Recharging.
Absolutely, recharging batteries, and then when it's on the gym floor, it's go time.
Yeah. And then what about favorite holiday destination worldwide?
Oh, we have been fortunate enough to do a bit of travel before everything kicked off. Really loved, I don't know, it's close to home, really loved Queenstown in New Zealand. That was a beautiful place, and that's actually where I proposed to my now wife, Jamie. Very picturesque and lots of cool things to do. We went skydiving and horse riding and jet boating and all those sorts of things that you do while you're in Queenstown. Only thing I didn't do was bungee jump, because I thought, if I jump out of a plane with a dude strapped to my back who wants to keep himself alive, like I feel like that's a bit safer than jumping off a bridge with a rope. So yeah, love that. But also, like, traditional, we've been to America and New York was pretty cool too, and I watched the Knicks versus the Trailblazers at Madison Square Garden. So that was a pretty crazy atmosphere and pretty iconic as well. So that'd be top two.
But awesome, mate. Great experiences. Well, we're at the pointy end of the podcast. Thank you so much for jumping on and sharing with us your journey, mate. And it's only the very start. There's some huge things that you've talked about that are really exciting that are coming up. And for anyone listening to the podcast, coach or athlete, what's the best way to get in contact with you, mate?
Yeah, look, I still answer all of our Instagram, Facebook, and emails. That's something I still haven't let go of yet. I still sort of get in touch. So it's PEAQ Performance, Peak Performance on Instagram, or just PEAQ on Facebook. And I want to get it out there. It's not that I'm dyslexic. It is a little acronym for Personalised, Evidence-Based, Applied and Qualified Conditioning Coaching. So, feel free to do that, or feel free to email me at info@peak.com.au.
We'll add those all in the show notes for those listening. And what's on the horizon for you, mate, for this year anyway? What are some big things that get you pumped?
Yeah, so I think for the time being, I'm pretty laser focused on heading to the States in July. Really excited for that. And I think there's a lot that probably rides on that. If we can get a good performance in, particularly in the World Games point of view in that 6v6 competition, if potentially we get a medal placing, I think that sends a strong message to the Institute of Sport. And if you are considered to be a medal contender, that's generally when funding will come. Being a medal contender can be the difference between money or no money, essentially. So really trying to do everything that we can to be beneficial to that program and make sure that we leave no stone unturned. And hopefully, the guys and girls both have a real red hot crack at it. Continuing to sort of solidify the work in the background in regards to the new facility. Really looking forward to being able to officially announce that, but just making sure that all the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed before it kicks off. And then, sort of see there's one or two other things that we can't talk about just yet, but, keep your eyes peeled because it's exciting and we're really, grateful for the support of everybody to elicit this growth.
Awesome, mate. Plenty happening and a bigger space as well. So it's awesome, mate. All your hard work's paying off, and I'll definitely be down there whenever I'm in Adelaide next to check out either the current space or the new space. But yeah, thanks again for your time. Thanks again for sharing what's worked for you, your learnings, mentors you've had along the way, and all the different experiences across the strength and conditioning industry, whether it be lacrosse, cricket, and state league and professional football, and now also opening a space. So you've done it all, mate, and thanks for sharing all your wisdom with us, mate.
Thanks for the opportunity, mate, and keep doing wonderful things in this industry. I'm looking forward to having you down, and make sure we bring Bubs as well. We'll just get them running around the basketball court, or organise a babysitter and we'll pump some iron.
Yeah, sounds good. Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for everyone that's tuned in. If you tuned in late, make sure you listen to the very start. Sean, provide gems all the way through, so you can watch that on our YouTube. We're also going to release in our podcasts, which you can find on all your podcast directories next Tuesday. So that'll be the 12th of April for those listening on YouTube. For our next Prepare Like a Pro live chat show, we've got Ben Stanley, the founder of Enhanced Football. You can tune in. That will be on the 15th of April next Friday at the same time, 8:30 p.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time. I'll see you guys then. Thanks for listening.